All right, so good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's Veteran Studies Association Colloquium Series. And my name is Dr. Latasha Henderson, and I'm glad that you are here with us today. For those who may be new to maybe this is your first time joining one of our series or our talks, I want to just talk to you a little bit about our organization, VSA. We are an international interdisciplinary organization that promotes and publishes scholarship about critical issues shaping veterans' experiences across all countries, historical eras, and identities. We provide space for teaching, research, advocacy, and community building with a special focus on highlighting the diverse and sometimes overlooked experiences of veterans and their families. We invite you to get more involved with VSA by becoming a member, whether it's full membership or simply joining our mailing list to stay connected to us. You can learn more about our organization on our website, veterinology.org/join. And now we are excited to introduce our speaker for today, Dr. Adam Tietje. And he is the editor for Military Chaplaincy Review and a chaplain in the U.S. Army Reserve. He holds a Doctor of Theology and Ethics from Duke University and is the author of Toward a Pastoral Theology of Holy Saturday. The talk that he's going to be delivering today is titled The Mysteries of May: How American Civil Religion Undergirds and Inflects the Sacrifices of Women and Soldiers. And thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Chiji, and please welcome Dr. Chiji and give him your undivided attention. Thank you. The floor is yours,
Yeah,
Dr.
thank you, Dr. Henderson, and thank you all for joining. So just a quick disclaimer, since both of those roles that she mentioned are sort of official government roles, that what I'm going to present today is in no way any sort of official kind of statement or endorsement implied. Yeah. So the trauma of men and women have been linked since World War I. The domestic trauma of women, sexual trauma, and the war trauma of men. And I would suggest that this association is not merely symptomatic or epiphenomenal, but that the moral and political agencies of service members parallels that of women in the traditional household. Service members occupy a subordinate and sacrificial role, just as women in the traditional household are formed to sacrifice for the good of their family. Service members are formed to sacrifice for the good of the nation. These parallels are established and enforced legally and politically. And some may be familiar with this good soldier, good wife trope from political theory. And so today I want to explore how this parallel also shows up in the civil religious stories we tell as a nation. And I think this shows up quite vividly in the month of May with both Mother's Day and Memorial Day. And these are what I call the mysteries of May. So the month of May begins with Mother's Day and ends with Memorial Day. Mother's Day honoring the sacrifices of mothers, of course, and Memorial Day is the civil religious holiday celebrating the sacrifices of fallen soldiers. These mysteries of May are deeply cruciform and reflecting the image of Christ and implicitly and very explicitly at times draw on, rely on, build on, and borrow from Christian theology. And so they're sacrificial, but also deeply gendered. All right, so I want to look at both Mother's Day and Memorial Day in turn. All right, so Mother's Day and Memorial Day both emerge in the wake of the Civil War. Both are shaped by the advocacy of women, especially mothers, and the relationship of women and war at the time. They both celebrate the sacrifices of mothers and soldiers and powerfully symbolize them. And both are sites of civil religious discourse and practice. So the proximate origins for Mother's Day in the US are traced to the advocacy of Anna Jarvis to honor the work of her mother, Anne Reeves Jarvis, who was appalled at the bloodshed of the Civil War and shifted the focus of the work of her Mother's Day work clubs from addressing unsanitary conditions in Appalachian households to providing aids in the camps on both sides of the conflict, caring for wounded soldiers. Jarvis's work also promoted friendship across this Union-Confederate divide among mothers, and afterwards she promoted a Mother's Friendship Day. Julia Ward Howe built on Jarvis's work around the solidarity of mothers and called for a Mother's Day for peace. And this was an explicit call for mothers to press public officials to pursue peace and not send their husbands and sons to war. And you can see the text here. There's significant tension between the advocacy of Anna Jarvis for the establishment of a national Mother's Day and the work of her mother. Scholar Catherine Lane and Antolini argues that Anne Reeves Jarvis, her work was in the service of a broader social role for women and mothers, while her daughter advocated for the celebration of the work of women and mothers within the home. And so Antolini suggests that the post-Civil War work of Anne Reeves Jarvis, Howe, and others points to the need for a Mother's Day and not Mother's Day. And of course, the placement of the apostrophe there that you can see on your screen makes all the difference as to which account of motherhood is honored and celebrated. A social motherhood with wide-ranging influence in political life, or motherhood within the bounds of the household. And of course, Anna Jarvis's Mother's Day won out. On May 9th, 1914, Woodrow Wilson issued a presidential proclamation directing government officials to display the flag on all government buildings and to invite people of the United States to display the flag at their homes or other suitable places on the second Sunday in May as a public expression of our love and reverence for the mothers of our country. And soon after, during World War I, it became the occasion for the popularization of Mother's Day as military leaders encouraged soldiers to write home and thank their mothers for their service on the home front. And General Pershing's pronouncement is a good example of this. Good mothers, it turns out, are mothers of good soldiers. And the very best mothers are the mothers of soldiers who made the ultimate sacrifice. And so it's during World War I that the Gold Star Mothers organization is founded. But this tension between a more openly social and political role for mothers and a maternal role confined to the household, we see deeply intertwined with American war. All right, so Memorial Day. Just as it's impossible to tell the story, the origin story of Mother's Day, apart from the sacrifices of soldiers, likewise, it's impossible to narrate the origin story of Memorial Day without reference to the sacrifice of mothers. After the Civil War ended on April 9th, 1865, multiple local practices emerged that can be seen as antecedents for our current observation of Memorial Day. And these practices are largely, if not wholly, thanks to the effort of women, grieving women seeking to honor and remember their beloved husbands and sons by decorating their graves with flowers. And of course, as you may know, it was originally referred to as Decoration Day, with the first official celebration at Arlington National Cemetery on May 30th, 1868. And after this, it would become a yearly national remembrance on May 30th at Arlington. Of course, many state and local memorials across the U.S. had competing claims to who did it first. And I'll hold some of those back just for the purposes of moving forward through for time. But suffice it to say, after World War I, these remembrances expanded to not just remember and honor fallen Civil War soldiers, but all fallen soldiers of American wars. So both Mother's Day and Memorial Day are public rituals that unite the larger political community by recognizing and honoring the sacrifices of mothers and soldiers. Mothers and fallen soldiers are made both visible and invisible on their respective days as they become known through the symbols or characters of mother and soldier. These symbols are used to tell and retell the story of the nation, the local community, and the family as a kind of salvation story. Mothers and soldiers are exemplars of sacrifice that beckon us toward further sacrifice. These public rituals are embedded within the broader political theology that sociologists have named civil religion. So Robert Bellah, sociologist, uses the term civil religion to describe the religious dimension that is discernible in the political life and history of America. This religious dimension is expressed in, quote, beliefs, symbols, and rituals. And in his book, Broken Covenant, he defines it as the civil or the religious dimension found, I think, in the life of every people through which it interprets its historical experience in light of transcendent reality. Bellah suggests that the quote, Old Covenant of American civil religion was embodied in the coming together of the Puritan tradition of New England and the founding of America as a chosen people, a city on a hill that calls back to the Exodus story, and then the civic Republican tradition of Virginia through the founders and the founding texts. If that's the old covenant, then Bellah suggests the new covenant in American civil religious life was written at Gettysburg in Abraham Lincoln's second inaugural address. And so there at Gettysburg, Lincoln explicitly links the deaths of soldiers in battle to Christ. And with his own death, Bellah writes, Lincoln himself, our martyred president, was linked to the war dead, those who gave their last full measure of devotion. Sociologist Lloyd Warner argues that Memorial Day ceremonies and rites take this dedication speech at Gettysburg as their prototype, and the unknown soldier as the central symbol for all fallen soldiers. So as with Gettysburg, the focus of Memorial Day remembrances of fallen soldiers is organized around their burial grounds from Arlington to cemeteries across America. Warner contends that Memorial Day can be understood as a cult of the dead. It integrates the community around the stories of the sacrifice of the dead soldiers for the living and the obligation of the living to honor those sacrifices by similarly seeking the good of the whole. And so even as the wider community is composed of a diversity of religious and social institutions, Memorial Day powerfully unites Americans by associating the sacrificial deaths of soldiers with the sacrificial death of Christ. Their deaths, like Christ, were salvific. Memorial Day is about the some who gave all, but in and through them, it has synectically come to include the all who gave some. And so by their wounds, the Union was healed and healed again. So this Christological figuration of fallen soldiers, this association of them with Christ, is made even more explicit in the National Moment of Remembrance Act signed into law by President Bill Clinton in December of 2000. The official moment of silence for Memorial Day is to take place at 3 p.m. And so in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the Gospels, this is precisely the hour when Jesus is said to have died, just to put a very fine point on it there. So like Memorial Day, Mother's Day is a bottom-up innovation that's subsequently become incorporated into American life with the endorsement of presidents. On Mother's Day, families honor their mothers, sacrificial love for their families. Mothers too defend and protect. Whether and to what extent their sacrificial love gets read as Christological, like soldiers, depends on the context. But mothers too give their bodies for their children in Eucharistic ways. The meal of bread and wine. Mothers at times also give their last full measure of devotion. But for the medical advances of the last century and still throughout the world, childbirth was and is very deadly. Mothers do give their lives, perhaps not in the first instance for the nation, but for their children. Even so, Mother's Day is a national holiday because of the national significance of the labor and love of mothers in the household. The labor and sacrifice of women in the household are essential to the surviving and flourishing of their political community. So both Mother's Day and Memorial Day are born of this linkage between mothers and soldiers. Both are born of the activism of first wave feminists, suffragettes, abolitionists, and even anti-war activists. So despite these origins and ongoing counter pressures, Mother's Day never again became a widespread day to call for peace, but remains what we know it to be now, a very somewhat saccharine at times hallmark holiday with national significance, especially in times of emergency and war, where the sacrifices of mothers and soldiers and their sons, the sons of mothers, become intertwined. So these are both holy days to honor and remember sacrifices of mothers and women and the sacrifices of soldiers, but sites of contestation. Competing Union and Confederate remembrances expose the rift in the narratives that emerged in the wake of the Civil War. Was America a Union preserved at high cost? And what kind of motherhood counts? And within the civil religious story, is it soldiers and mothers as symbols of righteous sacrifice or as conforming to those symbols that counts? All right, so Mysteries of May is somewhat of an odd choice for a term and a title, but I take my cues from theologian John Soward in his book Mysteries of March. So I track these stories as civil religious stories, but they're born of and bound up with Christian atonement theology. And so I'm not interested to disentangle one from the other, civil religion and Christian theology, because they're so deeply interwoven in American life, but just we'll draw out some of the specific Christian theology that is at play in the context of American civil religion and these stories. So civil religion draws on a set of stories, images, and symbols that, at least at one time, were shared in common by most Americans. And it works, civil religion, because it imbues this national story with this transcendent significance to the extent that the nation itself and participation in its life are understood as participating in the already existing narratives, in the case of America, of Christian theology. So May's mysteries illuminate the sacrificial embodiment of the love of mothers and wives and soldiers in the context of the nation. And so, as I said, I'm going to take my cues from Soward's book here around how this is connected to Christian theology. And so in his book, he explores the interconnections between Mary and Jesus. So the mysteries of May are the occasional liturgical intersection of the Annunciation of the angel to Mary about the birth of Jesus, and then the events of Holy Week, Good Friday, Holy Saturday, Easter Sunday. Sometimes these things occur on the very same day. And Soward contends that that's at the heart of Hans Urs von Balthasar, Catholic theologian, his theology. And so it's a really interesting conjunction. And so in that, Soward in Balthazar's theology notes 4 Christological analogies that are both Mariological and Christological and have sort of deep connections to who both Jesus and Mary are. So mission. So Jesus' incarnation as the eternally begotten Son is a mission. It's ascending, a missio. And so Mary too participates in this mission, and figures as the church, as Christ's bride, and is part of this ongoing mission of the church and of Christ. Obedience is the Son's yes to this mission in the life of the Trinity and Christian theology. It's the yes of the Father, or the Son to the Father. Mary too says, "Yes, Lord," at the Annunciation, in a kind of anticipated participation in this obedience of the Son. Kenosis is a word that means self-emptying, and this is a kind of obedience that is not mere obedience, but complete submission, utter self-giving. And so this is a word associated with Jesus's obedience unto death on the cross and the crucifixion, that there can be no other willing than this sort of complete whole self-giving in this act, and that Mary too embodies this. Exegesis is another Greek word that means to lead out or to interpret and show forth. And so in the Gospel of John, that the Son is the figure who exegetes or interprets or shows who the Father is in the life of the Trinity, and that this is a sort of the Word made flesh that reveals the Father in the life of the Son, both in speech and in silence, importantly in silence. So it begins in the silence of the womb and the hiddenness of Mary, and Jesus comes into the world as a baby, unable to speak. And so Mary too, in her own silence at moments, is this same sort of receptive, responsive, reflective kind of figure in this sort of silent word or exegesis. So these 4 mysteries are figured as for us, in the context of the church. They're substitutionary, they're in the place of others, they're participatory. So it's a participation in the life of God and of the church, and they're deeply gendered mysteries, right? So Christ is son and bridegroom, and Mary is handmaid, mother, and bride. And so this imagery involves giving and receiving that is both simultaneously sexual and virginal. And so these are the mysteries these analogies I use as a framework for understanding and analyzing the sacrificial role of soldiers and mothers and wives. All right, so cross-bearing women. So the sacrificial theology that provides the backdrop for the good wife or good mother trope is not exclusively Catholic or limited to Catholic context, even though that's sort of the theology I was alluding to there. Perhaps the most sort of influential and explicitly American theology that exemplifies this motif is the evangelical movement that continues to this day, called biblical womanhood. And so the biblical womanhood movement involves a scholarly effort to recover traditional gender roles for men and women, but it's not just that. It's also a lived reality or lived religion for many evangelical women. And that lived religion involves formation for sacrifice that I think we can examine with Soward's Mysteries of March framework. And so to do that, I want to examine what's called the True Woman Manifesto as an exemplar. And so this is, there's sort of more official statements of the biblical manhood and womanhood movement, but this is a kind of a bottom up example, and that's why I find it a bit more interesting to examine. So this, and of course, this is too small for you to see, but this is comprised of 3 sections. The first section is a series of 6 we believe statements. The second section you see there is 13 affirmations that follow from those beliefs. And then this third section there is a set of 15 commitments that women are asked to make. So women are asked to sign this statement. And so biblical womanhood, we see in the statement, is about what it means to be an image bearer of God as a woman. The second article states that we believe that the creation of humanity as male and female was a purposeful and magnificent part of God's wise plan, and that men and women were designed to reflect that image in complementary and distinct ways. So they often refer to themselves as complementarians. As a result, women have distinct roles and functions in the home and in the church. Okay, so mission. Women have a unique mission that the manifesto describes as a calling, and that this unique calling is expressed in and through marriage, motherhood, and in relation to other women. In marriage and in the life of the church, women are called to affirm and encourage men as they seek to express godly masculinity and to honor and support God-ordained male leadership in the home and in the church. They're to establish homes that manifest the love, grace, and beauty and order of God. And women are uniquely designed as bearers and nurturers of life. And so they're called to be mothers, or at least nurturers of their own children or other children in their life. Obedience. In the biblical womanhood manifesto, this command obedience relationship between husbands and wives features prominently, even if in a somewhat softened way. Some of the more explicit quotes in scripture are relegated to footnotes rather than in the body of the text. Instead, it states that women should honor and support God-ordained male leadership in the home and in the church, and that when we respond humbly and appropriately to male leadership in our homes and churches, we demonstrate a noble submission that honors God's word and reflects Christ's obedience to the will of the Father. And so we see this cruciform nature of womanly and wifely submission is clear in this statement. Women in the orbit of biblical womanhood, the reality for them is that the men in their lives are the ones who are supposed to be interpreting the word and will of God for them. All right, kenosis. So biblical women are called to demonstrate this noble submission, to cultivate the virtues of humility, submission, and meekness. And the manifesto very directly calls women to take on the form of a servant like Christ, asserting that selfish insistence on personal rights is contrary to the spirit of Christ, who humbled himself, took on the form of a servant, and laid down his life for us. The most proximate context for this selfless setting aside of personal rights is the context of relationships with men at home and in the church, to whom they're supposed to submit themselves. All right, and finally, exegesis. They're called to live as icons of God in and through their gender. As women, they're called to image God in unique ways. They're distinct and complementary icons for aspects of God and that are revealed in and through their gendered relationships. They reflect the image of God and the beauty of Christ and his gospel as women, and as only women can do. And this is done by following the holy pattern for our womanhood. So biblical women bear witness to Christ's submission, humility, and obedience, and they're invited into that through their role, their mission, through obedience, through submission, and the proclamation of a kind of silent word. They're image bearers of a God who reveals himself as male and female. Biblical men, the good wife or mother is a godly woman who is formed in the cruciform image to sacrifice for her family and her faith. Okay, so here's the upshot of this. So in the New Testament, the church is figured as both a kind of a city and a kind of a house, sort of household of faith or the city of God, and in various parts of the New Testament. In the church as city, biblical women are cut out from full participation. And so whatever equality in nature and dignity means, it does not mean full citizenship. So in congregational settings where the theology of biblical womanhood prevails, the church functions more like a traditional household for women, while simultaneously functioning as a polis or city for men. So that's the kind of political upshot of the hierarchical equality in biblical manhood and womanhood. So this theology of biblical womanhood animates a moral ecology in which women are formed not just to sacrifice themselves, and to accept subordination, but to endure willingly and out of love for and duty to their family and their faith. And as they do so, they stand under the authority of and in service to men in their lives. So it should not be surprising that biblical women see themselves, or some anyway, as soldiers to explain how, as women, they live under authority and rank lower than their husbands. And so to come back to our trope from political theory, turnabout is fair play. And so good wives are like good soldiers. And so one blogger compared her situation, her sacrifices, and her service to her family to that of the unknown soldier. And that picture was a few slides back, known but to God. So if even unknown fallen soldiers are remembered and honored, the untold sacrifices of women deserve recognition and honor as well, as this blogger was lamenting. And of course, we've just examined that day earlier. All right, now soldiers, soldiers as saviors. So the moral formation of soldiers is also shaped by narratives of sacrifice and directed to that end. The moral formation, and by soldiers, I am meaning to include all service members. The moral formation of basic training is oriented toward the inculcation of both the love of America and the love of one's fellow soldiers, in order that those loves might be oriented toward willing subordination and self-sacrifice. This involves conforming to soldierly icons. So trainees are presented with images of soldiers and stories of soldiers from the moment they step off the bus, and they're taught to see themselves in these images, from recruitment posters and commercials to the posters in dining facilities, and so forth. Formation and basic training and beyond is this process of increasing embodiment of these images, and the most powerful of which are uh, the most powerful of these icons and images through which soldiers are asked to see themselves are those those of war heroes. So the dead and sometimes living recipients of the nation's highest honors and medals. So it's in and through the stories of the sacrifices of these men and a few women as well. Soldiers are invited to imagine their own wartime character. So if soldiers are being formed to love their country and their fellow soldiers, the embodiment of that love is most fully realized when it's poured out on the battlefield in death. And so these images and stories of war heroics that most inspire soldiers and civilians alike are not simply stories of courage under fire. They're salvation stories. And so in and through these images and stories, soldiers are beckoned to imagine themselves as saviors, saving their fellow soldiers, saving America. So they're being called to participate in this salvation work to continue the American project. So the iconography of soldierly sacrifice and the image that is stamped upon the heart of soldiers is cruciform. And so we see this on the cover of Jonathan Ebel's book, GI Messiahs, quite vividly. And so soldiers are the incarnation of American ideals, he suggests. We see that in this quote. They're the word of the nation made flesh, whose willingness to suffer and die brings salvation to an offered wayward, but nevertheless chosen people. A callback to Bella's account of civil religionists deeply tied to the Exodus narrative. So Ebel goes to great lengths in this book to show how this soldiers as saviors trope runs in American life and in the lives of American soldiers. It's written not just in speeches, but in, as you can see on the cover, even in rock-hewn monuments and tombs. And the impulse behind and the impact of this sort of superabundance of crosses connected to the memorialization of fallen soldiers cannot be overestimated. This trope is almost exclusively bound up with Christian images of sacrifice, analogies to Christ, and highlights how soldiers participate in this work of atonement for America. And so Ebel argues that the veneration of fallen soldiers is like a cult of martyrs, and that the blood of soldiers functions as the kind of seedbed for America. And so, like Jesus, soldiers live and die for us. And so Jesus's words in John 15:13 are ubiquitous in the memorialization of soldiers. Greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends, to quote the King James. Ebel argues that soldiering is a civil religious practice and a site for considering civil religion as a lived religion. And so with Ebel's account here in view, we can examine the formation of soldiers for sacrifice in very similar terms as we looked at biblical women. So American soldiers too are sent out into the world and have a mission, sent not by their pater, their father, but by their patria, their country. Soldiers like Jesus are defined by mission. They exist for mission. The soldier's creed for the army is, I will place mission first. It's a missional vocation, and that mission is to fight and win wars. Soldiers too embody obedience. These things go together like thunder and lightning. Mission is nothing other than an order issued by someone with the authority to issue it, a commander, and the soldier's only possible relation to that, or at least is that of obedience or disobedience. So the military hierarchy is this rigid network of command obedience relationships. There are commanders and those who command, or there are commanders and those who are commanded. Kenosis, so soldiers too have this, are habituated and formed for the same kind of orientation of their will and subordination of their will to the will of the nation. So talked about as self as service, but it's a deep submission and subordination, this willingness to sacrifice or to be sacrificed, sacrifice one's own good or even one's own life for the good of one's unit, the army, or the nation. And finally here, exegesis. So I opened by this section on soldiers as saviors by talking about soldiers as icons for trainees and for one another, but they're also icons for the nation. So The mysteries of March are these mysteries of incarnation, of Jesus as the Word made flesh. And so the mysteries of May are similarly incarnational. Soldiers embody the word of the nation made flesh. They're not just asked to defend the nation's highest ideals and to sacrifice for this greater good of the nation and the army, but to embody them. They're supposed to conform to this image of the American ideals, and to be that for the nation. As a result, soldiers, like biblical women or women in the traditional household, serve as this kind of silent word embodiment of these ideals and image. The civil religious role that soldiers are called upon to play functions to erase their stories and embodied identities. This is particularly true for soldiers who are not white, but for them too. And Ebel examines this at length. He writes, the symbol of the soldier and the soldier as symbol facilitate a not knowing of the soldier, a hiding of the visible body, a forgetting of the remembered personality. To the extent that individuals involve themselves in the mythosymbolic discourse of soldiering and the rituals through which that discourse reaches the nation, they become simultaneously unknown and known, symbol and person. So this trope of soldiers as saviors flattens and even erases the identities of the very soldiers it is supposedly lifting up as heroes. The bodies and sacrifices of American soldiers are subsumed into our nation's stories apart from the particular context of their own stories, rendered invisible by this behind this messianic role. For biblical women, their equality in nature and dignity always exists, and as I said, in this context of these hierarchical relationships. And so we see that the political situation for soldiers is much the same. There's a recognition of the ontological equality of soldiers with every other citizen, at least at one time. I don't know about right now, but soldiers who were not citizens were offered a fast track to citizenship. Yet, as with biblical women in the context of the church, soldiers remain bound within a set of hierarchical relationships that simultaneously exclude them from full participation in the political life of the nation. The public accolades and recognition of soldiers and this sort of sacrificial theology that supports it serves to eclipse this underlying political reality. Soldiers live inside the state of exception. They exist in a relationship to the state, much like biblical women in the church, something akin more to like the traditional household. So the mysteries of May are cruciform. The formation of soldiers is cruciform. And so I think this can be summed up something like this. And I hope this is not too offensive. And here I'm taking a page from the ancient hymn and hymn about Christ in Paul's letter to the Philippians. So this is to put it in other words here. So soldiers who, though they existed in the form of citizens, did not consider their equality with their fellow citizens as something to be grasped. But they emptied themselves, willingly taking on the form of servants. They humbled themselves and became obedient, even to the point of death in training or in war. Therefore, the nation exalts them even more highly and thanks them for their service and honors and remembers them and gives them a name above every other name. Veteran. So I expect there would be a range of reactions to this, for some maybe concurrence, for others perhaps revulsion. And I welcome responses here, but my suggestion is that this is both what America is asking of its soldiers and who the military is forming them to be, and that this is what is honored and remembered on Memorial Day. So we've looked at the moral ecology of soldiers and mothers and wives and how they're deeply related, and how the mysteries of March, I'm suggesting, provide a framework for understanding the relationship of this moral formation for similarly sacrificial roles, and how Mother's Day and Memorial Day serve as sort of civil religious analogs, these mysteries of May. The history of these holidays reveals a fundamental instability in the kinds of moral formation or deformation that they fund. But I think that these mysteries of May help us better understand these ongoing resonances between war trauma and the war trauma of men historically and the domestic sexual trauma of women. So, love to open it up for questions.
So I have a question. You had mentioned the good wife trope being a part of political theory. Is that what you said? Political theory? Or do you have any
Yes.
examples or like things that we could read to learn more about this trope?
Yes. Yeah. So the earliest that I've seen it is in Mary Wollstonecraft, um, uh, on the rights of women. And then another, um, shoot, I'm trying to think of her name, scholar who picks it up and it um, develops it in a much clearer and more extended way
No
is
worry. If you can't remember right now, that's fine. If you want to share it with
okay.
me later, I can share it
Oh, I
out with our
can. I can
resources.
absolutely.
That's
Yeah,
perfect.
yeah. Oh,
Yeah. And then the other question that I have, and I'm sorry to hog up all the questions. You had mentioned the blog post where the young lady spoke about being the unknown fallen soldier.
yes.
Could you share that reference as well?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yep.
I loved this this presentation, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, appreciate that.
So we'll open up the floor for questions. If anyone else have questions or comments about Dr. TG's presentation. Back in the chat.
And then I will say happy for any like engagement, over email or that kind of thing as well.
It looks like we do have one hand raised, Charles. You can come off mute and ask your question.
Hello. 1 second. For some reason, I hope you can hear me, but for
We
some
can hear you.
reason, my camera is not wanting to engage or do its job. I'm going to fumble through a question while perhaps some other people in the audience consider their own thoughts and kind of digest the broad strokes of your presentation. I'm curious. I'm coming at this question and your research from kind of a more of a feminist theory, feminist literature positionality, and the problematization that women bring to feminist theory specifically. So, conservative women in, say, Croatia, which has a deeply Catholic uh, um, composite makeup for this population, or the Serbian Orthodox in Serbia, there's a rejection of some of these different comparisons, shall we say, between women and religion, the role in the home, and military service. where it drives at the heart of the notion of femininity as opposed to feminism, as well as the role of women in the home and the role of women in the family. So my question is, have you encountered any kind of pushback on the way that you're bringing these different narratives together, the Christian narratives, the biblical narratives, your references, and women soldiers who may not be one, either religious or appreciate or want to problematize the parallels that you create, or have otherwise other objections. So it's a very broad question. You can go whichever direction you'd like with it. It's just kind of a curiosity of me, because we encounter this quite a bit, where we have female women veteran research reciprocateurs who are speaking against a heteropatriarchal state or an androcentric state, but at the same time will say, don't you dare, paint me in the same brush as the feminists. I'm not a feminist. I reject feminist narratives. So we have to kind of take into account these contestations. And I was just curious if you've run across anything similar that you'd like to share or speak about. Thank you again for your presentation.
Yeah. No, thanks for the question. So I guess the two things that I would say are that, yeah, absolutely would expect pushback from religious contexts with sort of rigid constructions of the gender binary. And of course, in the American context currently, that's like very much the policy that's being pursued by the administration and the Secretary of Defense as it pertains to all kinds of things. And of course, the Secretary of Defense, again, I'm speaking in a very unofficial capacity here. The Secretary of Defense in the book that was published.
Noted unofficial.
Yeah. Like very much, again, at least in writing before his time as Secretary of Defense, was against women in uniform, in the service of preserving sort of these gender binaries and hierarchies. So I guess one, I think like this particular presentation and some of my research more broadly, like even if people want to like hold fast to that, I think what I'm doing at least is making plain and visible what's going on in and around that. And then for those that are sort of interested in like more feminist and womanist readings, like I think the interesting thing that like bringing these things together allows for is then for some of those critiques to then be brought to bear in contexts where they might and with communities that they might otherwise not sort of like be obviously or plainly sort of brought together. So I don't know that fully answers your question. There's a nuance in there that I didn't quite pick up around folks that were rejecting patriarchy but not wanting to claim that they're feminists, and that was the part where I couldn't quite.
Yeah, no, it was just an attempt to illustrate the kind of context of the question, where you have women that bring contestations to these narratives and the parallels and the comparatives and everything. And I was just using that as a way to kind of put into context or offer an example of context for the question that I was asking, where if you had encountered that before, or if you've heard any women narratives, subverting or promoting or facilitating your research. So yeah, that's what I meant there. Like I said, very broad question. As you wish to answer it, does everybody else has a chance to think through things. Thank you.
Oh yeah, thank you. And then the other thing I would say is just like I spoke about these things in very binary terms and separate and distinct terms, but then you can see how like soldiers who are women, then these experiences are sort of like intensified or exacerbated, et cetera, in terms of like the formation for those roles for sacrifice and so forth. Other questions?
I have a question. Is that all right?
Go ahead, Carrie.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Thanks for the presentation. I thought it was really interesting and compelling. We often get to hear from critical scholars in the context of VSA, but it's a particularly exciting opportunity to hear from someone who is also connecting this work back to practice in your kind of reserves capacity. I know here you're thinking about this as a scholar, but what type of implications would you draw for chaplains or this area, this kind of profession, based on what you found in this research in supporting the spiritual development of like active duty or even veteran service members in the context of what they're dealing with today?
Yeah, no, great question. Yeah, so so I served as an active duty chaplain for almost 10 years before going back to school. And then, of course, continue to serve as a reserve chaplain. So absolutely thinking about this as someone who is still part of the institution and serves within the context of the institution and is interested to care for soldiers and veterans. And so, yeah, so in the context of like this presentation and some of the other stuff that's connected to it, very much in sort of a political direction. So, as I was talking about in terms of the clear like parallels around the attenuation of political agency. So, yeah, so again, unofficial capacity. So I'm interested in the unionization of soldiers, which is illegal. And I don't think the administration. So there was during the Biden administration, the Department of Justice basically upheld that like National Guard could unionize in their capacity as like working for the state and as Title 32, I think. So like when they're not activated for federal missions, that they can be unionized, but active duty and reservists can't. But yeah, so this is something obviously, and then Charles, you may be familiar with this in the context of Europe, but that's something that is possible for soldiers in most of sort of Western European countries. So unionization, so increasing opportunities for political agency is definitely sort of the big upshot of the project. And I'm also interested in sort of universal service and the sharing of the burden more broadly. Yeah. And then, so thinking about sort of like the wounds that I sort of briefly alluded to around thinking about PTSD or moral injury or those kinds of things, like they're primarily viewed in a very narrow individual, personal, clinical kind of frame. And so then in terms of thinking about the care of soldiers and veterans, like connecting these wounds to these larger sort of political contexts, both of the institution and their formation and the particulars of the conflicts in which they arise.
That's very interesting. Thank you. I recognize the difficult position you're navigating, speaking on that as a, someone who can do the work and has done the work, and also thinking about it from a theoretical side. So I appreciate you being here and talking with us about it.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Given that we are at time, I'm going to open the floor for any last minute questions before we close out. Okay. Well, I will close out by saying thank you again, Dr. Tietje, for this wonderful, oh wait, I think, oh no, Nick's giving a hand clap, sorry, for this wonderful and thought-provoking presentation. And thank you to everyone who has joined our conversation today. And again, if you are new to VSA, you're looking to get involved or want to become a member, feel free to join our website, visit our website to join. And also there is our Veterans in Society Conference 2026 that's coming up. It'll be at the University of Chicago in March. And if you want more details on submitting a proposal to that conference, feel free to visit our website to learn more about the proposal process. We are coming up on the deadline for that proposal, which is October 1st. And I think I have another comment in the chat. Give me 1 second just to make sure.
Sorry, that was me, probably an ill-timed question regarding the conference. I had sent an email asking if it's going to be hybrid so that those of us outside the United States could join. Sorry, but it's completely different conversation.
You know what? We hadn't, Charles, thank you for bringing that up. We hadn't given that a thought, but we will definitely consider that. And if that is an option, we'll make sure that we communicate that to our community. So again, if you're interested in learning more about what we're doing or keeping up with what we're doing, feel free to visit our website and join as a mailing list member. And you'll be able to get newsletters and emails from us letting you know all of the things that we have going on with VSA. And I also welcome you to sign up for and register for our next series that's coming up next month, October 21st. We will be having a panel discussion, crafting veterans' voices, creating mediums in veteran studies. So that's something that you also have to look forward to. You can sign up on our Eventbrite page and you'll be able to register for that as well. Thank you again for being here, everyone, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
And thank you for the opportunity.